clicking the button. So I'll let you know. It'll do a little countdown for us.
All right.
And we'll chat and talk until we recognize that people are actually watching. There we go. That was the little notification we were waiting for. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Findmypast. We're excited this week. It's Findmypast Let's Discuss series, and today we're going to talk about Ontario, which is exciting. I am fascinated by genealogical research in Canada, actually, so this is going to be a good one. All right, I'm going to wait for people to indicate that they are online with us, so please let us know when you see this video pop up on your thread, on your stream. Give us a little like, tell us hello, tell us where you're watching from. That would be awesome. So we know who you are and where you are. I'm still trying to configure my own page. You guys know how this works. If you've been with us before, you have seen this process a couple times. We always like to give it a couple seconds to make sure that we're actually good to go here. So my name is Jen Baldwin. I am the Data Acquisition Manager for North America for Findmypast. And I have been hosting the Let's Discuss series now for the last few weeks. Very exciting stuff. We've learned a lot together. Oh, and we already have comments coming in. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you all with us. I need to turn the volume down on my tablet. See, I advise all my people to do this and then I forget to do it myself. I am excited to have with me this week Steve Fulton, the president of Ontario Ancestors, formerly known as Ontario Genealogical Society. And Steve is just a fabulous person to know in the world of genealogy, a passionate volunteer, incredibly passionate about Canadian history and Canadian research. And like I said, the president of the organization and a good friend of mine. Steve, we're so excited to have you with us. Thanks for coming along to play today.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. I look forward.
Yeah. So let's see. We've got Catherine from Edinburgh, and I said it wrong. Edinburgh. Karen says many of my distant cousins migrated to Canada. That's very good. Hello from New Zealand from Catherine. Helen's in Oregon. Barbara in Windsor, Ontario. St. Catharines, Ontario. Oh, Steve, that's you. It took me a second. Dee in South Wales, fantastic. Marilyn from New Jersey. Sylvia Valentine says, hi, Steve, nice to see you.
Hi, Sylvia.
Yeah, it's always good to see friends, isn't it? Karen's in Enfield in North London. Dee is with us today. It's fantastic. All sorts of you guys. This is so fun. Ba is in Port Hope, Ontario. Grace from London. Marilyn Bergen. I met you in Philadelphia a while ago. I'm not sure, Marilyn, if you're talking to me or Steve, but either way, it's really great to have you with us. Oh, Seattle. Oh, good, Terry. Thanks. I grew up near Seattle. That's fun. Anna says her grandfather was born in Winnipeg, but came back to Scotland at a young age. We've got Australia and New Zealand. So this is great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon or this evening, depending on your time frame, where you're actually at in the world. Ellen is back from Roscoe, Illinois. So good. Okay, so let's jump in. Let's talk about Ontario research. There's so much to discuss. This conversation could really go a million different directions. I'm just going to warn everybody because Steve and I tend to get on bits of tangents when we talk to each other. It's always fun, just bits. So first thing, if you have a question about Ontario research, please do put it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. That's one of the reasons we're here, is to make sure that your questions get answered. If you post a question and we don't have an answer for it immediately, or we don't get to it during the hour, just know that we will come back and comment on the thread after we're done with the live feed. So don't worry if we don't address your question right away. We will get to it. Let's discuss. This series was designed by Findmypast to kind of fill some of the time while we're all in lockdown during the pandemic. And so we hope that all of you are doing well and you're handling all of that okay, that your family is okay and healthy. So that's good. So Steve, tell us a little bit first about, how do we phrase this question? If someone were to come up to you and say, hey, I'm brand new to research, genealogy research in Ontario, what's the #1 first piece of advice you give them?
Well, there you go. There's a tough question.
And we always start with the hard stuff.
We always start with that, and we always start with, start with yourself. But that always goes coupled with Ontario was really had done a lot of name changes, and throughout as Canada was born, pre-Confederation and even after Confederation, Canada wasn't Canada, prior to Confederation. And so you need to understand your geography. I really try to drive that home. Really try to understand what Ontario was, what Quebec was, and what the St. Lawrence was, and what communities were. If that will really help tie in when you're doing those census, trying to understand census records and stuff like that, if you understand the geography.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite realities about genealogy is that you can just never have too many maps. I'm a big fan of maps, and it's
absolutely
true. I think no matter what location on the planet you're talking about, right? There's no such thing as too many maps.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes it all come together because if you try to research your past using today's map, you're not going to get anywhere. Not in Ontario. You're not going to get anywhere. Yeah.
and even maps that aren't from the time frame that you're looking for, like maybe you're looking at 1875. If you've come across a map from 1801, it's still relevant, right? It still absolutely applies to your research because it builds that story about how that person got there in 1875. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maps are important. Okay, so, and let's talk for a second about your organization so we can get that out of the way. Tell us about Ontario Ancestors and what you have to offer.
Okay, well, Ontario Ancestors, or the Ontario Genealogical Society, whatever people are used to, has been around since 1961. It's a volunteer-based organization. We do have an office of 3 staff. And I really sum the organization up as simply one phrase: boots on the ground. Jen's heard this a million times from me, and it'll be a million more. We have wonderful partners like Findmypast that we thoroughly enjoy, but it's nothing's better than sitting down or emailing a volunteer within one of our branches, since we have 35 branches and special interest groups across the province, and understanding the grassroots of that community and why this street was named this, or what that, what that founding family was. So we're completely volunteer driven. All of our branches and special interest groups have their own website. They have indexes on their websites and different local resources that you can't really find anywhere else. So if anything, I would encourage you. We are a member-based organization, so we do membership, and our passion is to educate, preserve, and advocate. So that pretty much sums it up. You could probably drive a Mack truck through that, but anything genealogy, that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I mean, you and I have talked about this many, many times, that genealogy societies are so incredibly important. And so underutilized, unfortunately. Not everything is on Findmypast or any other website for that matter. No. And genealogy societies are filled with people who are passionate about the research just like us, but actually typically, historically, live in that place, or defined by geographical boundaries, right? I mean, there's plenty of societies that are defined by other interests, right? And we'll talk about maybe one of those in a little bit, but the vast majority of them, especially in North America, are geographically based. So get to know your local society wherever you're researching. It's super important, especially in the days of the internet and Facebook and all these things. Like, it's so much easier than it used to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of questions coming in, which is fantastic. Thank you all.
Good.
Victoria says she found a great-grandfather that went to Canada and signed up for World War I. I always wondered what the draw was to go to Canada from London. And I'm wondering, Victoria, if you are implying, and I think you're implying, that he actually went to Canada in order to enlist, or did he immigrate to Canada and then just happen to enlist reasonably close to that point of immigration? But in the meantime, Steve, do you know of any Or
Well,
have you heard about this
there's
before?
a few reasons. And if it was World War One, Canada was still, in its infancy,
True.
because Confederacy was 1867, so the war wasn't far after, really in a time frame. A lot of British service personnel trained over here. So
Yeah.
there might be that they may have enlisted due to the fact that everything was in its infancy, and the British government offered services to help train Canadian soldiers, or they come over for training on their own. We're not very far from here. That probably about 40 minutes from here, there's an airport in Haldeman that used to train British soldiers in flying, and they would fly over Lake Erie and stuff like that. So there could be lots of reasons what brought them here. Yeah.
Yeah, and my own research. For those of you who might have watched last week, you probably remember and know that even earlier in the history, it was a pension scheme. Before Confederation, the British Army offered land and money in Canada as a pension instead of actual, like a real full-on pension in Britain. And I suspect that's how one of my ancestors ended up in Canada, was because he took advantage of that program. So that military relationship between Britain and Canada is long running, right? There's a lot of back and forth there. And even going way back into the colonial period and through the American Revolution and all of that, you see a lot of involvement of British soldiers and sailors staying or being transferred to Canada territories. Yeah. I know that's much earlier than you were referencing in the question, Victoria, but still interesting history in my opinion. But I don't know. Oh, Victoria says she thinks he did go to enlist. So that's interesting. Okay, so Susan says, my paternal grandfather was allegedly born in Ontario. He was orphaned early, the story goes. DNA suggests an extra-parental event involved in the surname Bain from Scott Township. This was in 1874. Other than censuses and birth, marriage, death records for various Bains, there's little beyond this. Any suggestions for additional sources? So I think what you're really looking for is records from the 1874 timeframe in and around Scott Township.
Okay.
That's a really specific question.
That's a very specific question, because my first thing, of course, is I'm going to go back to is the geography. Scott Township. And I would be curious where that is. And now on my other screen, I have Google Maps on
there
here.
You go.
And I did a very quick Scott Township, but I got no hits for Ontario. I
did.
Did you? Okay.
The Durham region. It looks like.
Durham region. So there you go. We've got Bain from the Scott Township, possibly the Durham region, 1874. So just a little over Confederation. The problem is birth, marriage, death, like birth registrations didn't start till 1869, but that didn't mean that they happened. We've got a lot. I even had my grandfather's brother had to do a late registration just to get his old age pension. He was never registered at birth from the farm. So during that time period, information is challenging. What I would suggest, like we talked about earlier, boots on the ground. I would reach out to the Durham branch of our society and see if they've got any information there that's outside of the box of the regular census or birth, marriage, death, and see that they have something. So, but that would be my suggestion at that point as well.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see. Right, we're going to talk about a few of these questions. There's a lot of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So that's really good. We have a lot to talk about today. All right. Any advice on home children from the UK?
There we go.
That's a topic, right? You knew this was coming up.
I knew this was coming up. So British home children. That's what originally got me into genealogy and family history, because my wife's grandfather was a British home child. That was a very rich discovery and a path of understanding who he was. There is an organization outside of our society that is solely focused on the British home children. We do have a special interest group for the British home children where you can get more information. There was hundreds, if not thousands of kids that came over to Canada. I'll be very honest, not a lot of them were treated well, but there was a lot that were treated well, like my wife's grandfather. They grew up, contributed to Canada, lived a very rich life, married, had children. The last time I checked that they said 10% of Canadian population can find their roots going back through British home children.
Wow, really? 10%?
Yeah, like it's a large number. And I would encourage you to start with Library and Archives Canada, the passenger list. If you go to Library and Archives Canada, that's our national archives, you can look, there's a British home child database, and there's also the passenger list. And what you will find on the passenger list, and this is how I discovered originally, is you'll pull up a passenger list and you'll see a group of children and then only like 4 or 5 adults with them. 9 times out of 10, they could be British home children. And then you can find them in the list, and then there's further resources and further volunteers that would help you along your path of discovery. Yeah, kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a really, really interesting component of history. I don't know enough about it. I have some reading, I think, to do, but yeah, always something that I've been a little bit fascinated by. Okay, let's see. There was one on here that I was.
If I could just make a point to the British.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Yeah. So my wife's grandfather came through Bernardo's, and Bernardo's is still in existence over in the UK, and they still have the records. We were able to obtain the records before they started to charge for them. So part of the purpose of looking at those passenger lists is to find out what the organization they came through, and then seeing if you can find those records. So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Okay, no, that's great. And feel free to interrupt me at any time. So we had, last week, we did a video on the new Findmypast photo collection.
Yes.
And I was able to feature some of the Canadian stuff, which was a lot of fun. But on that post, we had a couple of questions that I actually didn't get the chance to address. So I would like to address them today. So hopefully these people are watching, Heather and Maurice. And they both have very similar questions, but 2 different time frames. And essentially the question is, how do they access military records from World War I and World War II for the Canadian Armed Forces?
All right. I wish they just gave them, Library and Archives Canada just gave them all to the society, and we would take care of them graciously and lovingly. But the World War I attestation, and I'd probably never say that right, papers are available on the Library and Archives Canada's website. You can also visit our society's website at ogs.on.ca. And within Tony, the Ontario Name Index, we'll probably talk about that in just a bit here.
Yep.
Those documents are also in that index as well. So they tie in with Library and Archives Canada, or what we tend to call it as LAC. Now, the World War II is a little bit more challenging because Library and Archives Canada has them, but has not made them public.
Now, is that for, like, is that because of privacy security rules?
Yeah. Because there's still vets living and breathing.
Absolutely. Yep.
And, sure. My grandfather served in World War II, and I was able to send away for the documents, and Library and Archives Canada, unfortunately, had a very long waiting period, and that was 10 months. And I finally got it after 10 long, excruciating months of waiting. And then I found out someone submitted through Veterans Affairs and they got it in like 8 weeks.
Oh, wow, really?
So, with everything currently going on in these
Yeah.
challenging times, a lot of that stuff is shut down. Send your submissions. You'll find the form for the World War II stuff on Library and Archives Canada. Fill it out, send it in. But with everything going on right now, it could be months, months, months,
Sure.
months.
Sure. And
Um,
and that's reasonable, really.
yes, very much so.
No one can get into the archives to actually
No.
make copies or do anything. So I looked into this a little bit too because we had these questions in it a little bit in advance. So I'm going to post some resources on the comments that are specific to Findmypast, of course, but we do have a handful of sources for contextual sources for both world wars and specific to Canada. So there are a couple of published books that are now out of copyright that we have on the site. You can find them on other places as well, but they're good resources. And then there's of course, just our military collection. Now, the vast majority of records on Findmypast are from the UK. However, because of that military connection that we talked about already, that cross between Canada and England that was so common in both Great Wars, there are a lot of Canadians to be found in the British records. And they could be, at training camps, they could be injured, they could be referenced in letters or newspaper articles or that kind of thing. So I'm going to share some of those links. The other thing that I would strongly recommend is newspaper research, because even though the official military records are closed, newspapers are being digitized at an incredibly high rate. And the British newspapers in particular covered both Great Wars, obviously, very, very carefully, right? And so I was able to find a handful of mentions in newspapers just specific to these questions. So that was kind of the general question. Now, the second question from Maurice was more specific. I think it was, Maurice. He wanted to know specifically about the Canadian cyclist battalion during World War I, which I was just like, I Googled it and I just went, yes, this is really great stuff. So what do you know about the Canadian cyclist battalion? And then I'll share what I found.
Well, I didn't know as much as I did this afternoon after I kind of got a prerequisite to look this up, and it was absolutely fascinating,
right? I thought so too.
and their job, and unfortunately at the beginning they were more laborers, guys on bikes, and they were laborers, but at the end they became more of an intelligence force. And I just did a simple Google search and I found a cycling magazine that
did an article on the history, right?
Article and
I think I found the same one.
And the really cool, maybe Jen, you could post that link for them. They give the detailed schematics of the bike, and the different things that are on the bike that enabled them to do that. But what were they saying? The bike weighed something like 40 kilograms or 40 pounds or something.
Yeah, something like that. Actually, I think I do have that link, right?
Yeah, it was in the document.
It's in here. Yeah, so let me pull that as well. I was admittedly fascinated by this too. And Maurice, you didn't tell us the name of your ancestors, so I wasn't able to pinpoint anything specific, but I was able to find that if I just searched on Findmypast or on British newspaper. Oh, oops! I'm trying to talk and do stuff at the same time. It's not working. If I search on the British Newspaper Archive or Findmypast, either one with kind of basic, kind of generic search terms. So, for example, if you search the military collection on Findmypast and just filter it to World War I or the First World War, and then the keyword cyclist, there were thousands of hits that in the collection that came up. So it's really, really interesting. And I'm also going to post a couple of newspaper examples from the cyclist history. So just some really, really interesting materials, actually. So I'll get those posted in here in just a second. Having to do 7,000 things at a time is a little bit hard for some of us sometimes, even after a couple of cups of coffee. But the newspapers, the British newspapers, were so careful about publishing like lists of people who'd been killed in action and that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
they even from international units, right? So not certainly not just from the British Army, but from Canadian units and US forces and Australian forces as well. So definitely check international newspapers from no matter what perspective you're coming from, no matter where you are in the world. Okay. So yeah, that was a really, really interesting one. Now I'm going to go back to the comments. Let's see. Okay. Catherine says, oh, there are words in here I might not pronounce right. I am researching my Martin ancestors who settled in Pulsenich. I would like to find out how they lived. I understand they settled in the early to mid 1800s. Is that how badly did I butcher that location?
I think you battered it just a bit, but I'm not going to attempt to repeat it.
Pulsenich?
Yeah, let me just look it up here. It's in the Wellington County.
Okay.
And again, I always go back to, we have a branch in that area, the Wellington County branch. 1800. Is it 1800? I just lost the comment.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, 1800. So we at that time are all pretty much in our, an infancy state. And in most cases, in people, I would first research the community. I would do some research in the county and then the township and try to really understand what people are doing at that time frame, the 1800s. And then from there, start to discover the founding families and stuff like that. I think that's what I would kind of build a timeline per se. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably how I'd start as well, especially with an area I'm really unfamiliar with, right? The first thing you do is get yourself more familiar and try and figure out what the nuances are. And there's a couple of really great resources for that, right? The Genealogy Society that's local, of course, is the #1 stop. The Family Search Wiki is excellent, and is also often written and contributed to by the same people who volunteer for the society. So you're getting kind of best of both worlds when you utilize those resources in tandem. Try and start by creating a bit of a research guide for yourself, right? Write down what you know about your ancestor and then fill in the blanks, right? Okay, he went to Canada in, I think, around 1850, for example. So what happened in 1850 in Canada that was significant? And so those kind of historical markers along the route so that you can watch for the impact those events had on his life or her life. Okay, so let's see. Catherine just wants to know, am I able to see any of that research online as she's based in Scotland? And that's referencing the conversation we just had. So yeah, Catherine, absolutely. There's tons of resources.
Right. And, Findmypast, they have resources online. The local branch has resources as well. And I personally know the volunteers out of that branch, and they're a wonderful group of people. Reach out to them. I'm certain they would be more than willing to lend you a hand from a distance.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so a handful more people joining us. That's good. Leslie's watching from Tucson, Arizona. I know Leslie. Hi, Leslie. That's fun. Okay, I think we got that one. Okay, Allison. No, that's in response to someone else. Hang on. Oh, Kay says my granddad's half-sister married a Canadian soldier, and when the war ended, they both went to live in Carleton, Ontario. I recently found the family of granddad's sister. So that, of course, is a perfect segue into war brides, which we were actually talking about right before we started the video. So do you want to comment a little bit on the war bride?
Well, definitely. The war brides is a very common term. And I just looked up some stats prior to this, and something like 60 to 65,000 war brides and their children came to Canada after World War II. A significant impact to Canada and, the continuing evolving of a nation. yeah, Carleton is up near the Ottawa area. I think it's about a 45-minute drive outside of Ottawa, Canada's capital. And a lot of them settled. And what did I say? About 10% figured, nope, England's a better place and they shipped back. But
They went
that's
home.
all right. That's all right. They gave it a try. They gave it the college try.
It is cold in Canada.
Oh, it's not cold in Canada.
Yes, it
It's
is.
relevant. So, yeah, the war brides are just a fascinating story to hear, and how that all happened. Yeah.
And such a relatively speaking, such a close impact in terms of history, right? Like it really wasn't that long ago. So we're talking about people's moms and grandmas, right? A living memory of people. And I think that's maybe one of the more fascinating aspects, because you really do have this large population of people who immigrated relatively late in the history of immigration into North America.
Yeah, and
Even
it
though
was
that's
during
ongoing.
yeah, and even though it was a time when immigration was kind of being shut down a bit, but it was they said one of the largest migrations of, women going from England to Canada.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. And speaking of war brides, we do have, I mentioned a few minutes ago that photo collection that we launched a couple weeks ago, and actually as part of the anniversary for VE Day. In that photo collection, there's a series of photos specifically from Canada, but also some of the British photography includes images of war brides, or essentially the war bride help desk that they set up in London and across England before they actually traveled over. So we did a video on that and a blog post on that recently. So I'm going to share those links into the thread as well, so people can directly access. Those images are really, really striking in some cases. So there's pictures of women with babies and, leaving on the train and, kissing their soldiers goodbye. And it's just that really, really emotive images. All right, let's see. Ken McKinley from Ottawa says hi.
Hey, Ken.
Thanks for joining us, Ken. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Catherine said, thank you so much for the advice. You're welcome, Catherine. Let us know if we can help you in any other way.
Yes.
So I'm scrolling back again. If I miss your comment, don't despair. We'll try to get to everybody. Let's see. We did the home children. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is a good one. Pam has hit a bit of a brick wall. Charles Henry Hicks, born somewhere between 1847 and 1843, but went by Henry, was in the 1881 census. Different dates of birth, different places of birth. 2 locations in Somerset, it looks like, and then just can't find a baptism or birth record. So Pam, I'm going to ask for a little bit more information if they ever came to Canada, or if they have a relationship with Ontario, or if this is you think or you suspect strictly a UK question. Either one is totally fine. We just want to clarify a little bit on that, so that we can address your question more appropriately. We got that one. Let's see. Okay, so let's, oh, you know what? I was also going to mention that bicycle question. There's some great images of World War II bicycle units too, the way they folded them up and parachuted into locations across Europe with their bicycles, like, strapped to their chest. I thought that was pretty interesting also. Okay. That was totally from like 20 minutes ago, but that's all right. Let's talk about census records, actually. I think that question that we just asked, tell us a little bit about the accessibility of census records. How do Canadian censuses work? How often are they released, et cetera, et cetera? What do we need to know about the Canadian census?
So Canadian censuses are released, I think it's about every 93 years. But we've got them going back now. The earliest census, and you will find out if you want to see any of the census, they're pretty much anywhere on the site. The 1666 census from New France is the earliest of census, and you'll find that on Library and Archives Canada's website. Really what we get into is the 41 and the 51 and 61. So it's every 10 years that it's going through. And currently, the latest one for Canada is 1921. Now, that I've said all that, I'm going to totally mess with your minds on this, because you have to remember, we go back to geography. Canada wasn't all Canada what you see of today. So I just said 1921 is the latest Canadian census, but Newfoundland and Labrador were not a Canadian province until the 40s, 49. So their latest census is 1945. So it really depends on where your ancestors lived and that, because there's also a 1916 prairie census from the western part of the province, the country. So again, it's about understanding your geography and then understanding when the census was taking place. Now, I believe it was 51. They only took the names of the head of the household, and that, slowly changed and over time. So also understand what each census was, what data it was gathering. I will be I have to speak up for the enumerator because I did that once. So if you curse them because they spelt something wrong, it's probably because it was raining and there was a dog gnawing on their ankle at the same time. Trust me, I know. And it was a tough job. You think going from door to door, just knocking and asking questions is easy, but it was a tough job. So.
It's a good point, actually, and it's one that maybe we should stop and think about a little bit more often, right? The way that censuses were taken in the United States and Canada were different than the way they're taken in England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, right? And in England, they mailed the forms to the household and let the people fill it out themselves, and then trusted them to mail it back. I don't know about Canada, but I don't think that would have ever flown in the US. So yeah, we did have door-to-door enumerators, and very different experience, right? And so you don't get to see, like, I love the British Census because you get to see their handwriting so quickly, so easily to find. Whereas in North America, it's not quite so quick sometimes.
Yes. And when you're asking the guy the third time how to spell his last name and he's getting agitated,
right?
You do your very best to accommodate the gentleman.
yeah,
or the lady
for
of the
sure.
house.
Yeah. So a couple minutes ago, you mentioned the Ontario Name Index, otherwise known as Tony. And then you also have the Ontario Genealogical Society Provincial Index, or OGSPI. Tell us a little bit about those indexes and how useful they can be towards Ontario research.
Yeah, so let's start with Tony, the Ontario Name Index. So it's now cooking somewhere around 12 million names, and we're really excited about that. But Tony is a referral database. It will list the information, but the magic is it's about promoting others in a sense. There's a lot of boots on the ground within Tony, Canadian headstones, the World War I records, local genealogical communities, where you can pull up the information. Then it says, go to this organization for further information. And that's what Tony is really about, is about that central clearinghouse to, help people find things. OGSPI, when I first come on, OGSPI was a monster. It was a monster of a thing, and we're very thankful for the partnership with Findmypast, because they helped us tame that monster. And it was a lot of people's family histories. It was something like, what was it, 90,000 HTML pages, just basic
like
websites
that.
that were just hyperlinked and hyperlinked and hyperlinked. and it was just a monster. And it just contains data that people have submitted. I will just give the disclaimer: it's not sourced, and you need to take it with a grain of salt. But hey, it's better than it could break down one of those brick walls. So I would encourage you to check it out, and it is linked from our site to the Find My Past site, and you can search it there.
And it's one of those sources that it is user submitted data, right? So it's you and me sitting around going, oh, I think I found this and this looks right to me, and so I'm going to put it in the index. And it is a tool to try and help the community help each other, right? It's a scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of deal. But I see it the same way that I kind of see online hints, right? We all have, or many of us have our trees online on some platform, and we get those little hints. And there's nothing saying that that is written in stone. That is a hint for me to research. It is a suggestion at best. And so you take that suggestion and you examine it with your own intelligence and your own thoughtfulness and apply as needed. But at the same time, there's no reason to ignore those suggestions. We use them as a time saver, really, to do the more intense, in-depth genealogy. I think that we all kind of are attracted to. That's my own personal hint soapbox, I suppose. But okay, so while we were talking about some of those basic resources, I know we had a few other comments and questions. So Elizabeth just put this one in. My grandfather went to Canada in 1896, worked as a stonemason and laborer. According to the letter he sent to his brother, he had to pay £2 to join the union before he could work. He was in Winnipeg. But he moved around, complained about the cost of train travel. Letters mentioned Hawk Lake and other places. Also went to the U.S. He said that he went to the gold mines. However, came back to Wales after about 5 years. He said there was 6 months of winter. I'm assuming she means 6 months of winter in Canada, because
probably.
Yeah, I agree. I've never lived in Canada, but it's colder there than where I live. So there. Yeah, that's a really interesting story, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing. I think that's probably right, that he would have had to pay that fee to join the union. Steve, do you know anything about union records, and if there's a way for her to document that?
I don't know, because this is in Winnipeg and Manitoba.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So what I would do, again, there is the Manitoba Genealogical Society. You could reach out to them. They also have an equivalent to Tony called Mani, M-A-N-I, and you could do a search through their website as well. Another fantastic group. Just so you know, Elizabeth, we still complain about the train costs here. Canada's pretty big. Getting around, it costs a few dollars. But and during 1896, there probably wouldn't have been too much border crossing documentation. You just flow back and forth.
Yeah, no, I think the border crossings start just a smidge later than that, early 1900s. It is, I mean, you might find them in some of the earliest records going across the US border, depending on when he went back to Wales. But if he was in the area or if he was rather on this continent for 5 years, you might find him.
Right. And if he was 1896 and he was here for 5 years, you could have picked him up in the 1901 census.
Ken says that sounds like a short winter in Winnipeg.
Yeah, Ken, that's a great point. Yeah. I figured that. Wait a second, that should be about 8 months.
Okay, so Sarah asked, is there a family history group close to or near Port Elgin? My great-grandparents moved there in 1884, and my grandfather was born there. So Port Elgin, Ontario.
Port Elgin? E-L?
Oh, E-L-G-I-N. Elgin or Elgin?
Yeah. Port Elgin.
Elgin, hard G, got it.
So let me just see. We're probably in the, we're in the Bruce and Gray, not far from Owen Sound. I believe that's what we're looking at. There's a Bruce and Gray branch up at that area. And they've got a lot of their resources on their website that you can check out. There's one of the members of that branch is actually on this call.
Oh, perfect.
So she's
So
hearing
you guys
me
need to
and
talk.
rah, Bruce and Gray. And she's there. She's probably listening to me right now. So
That's awesome.
that's what you do.
All right, good. There was another question here about death records. Let me just
Yeah.
scroll back to it so I can find the year again. Every time I stop, I take my finger off it, it loses my spot.
Okay.
Husband's cousin died in 1875 in Pickering, Ontario, according to the family story. Cannot find a death record. So death records around 1875.
Okay. So first thing, probably kind of go backwards here. Let's hit up Canada. Canada, Ontario has a lot of headstone websites. There's just not one dedicated one. So all the way from Billion Graves down to Canadian Headstones to Find a Grave to Canada GenWeb. I would start there. See if we've got a headstone that's been photographed and documented. And start going backwards in that sense. 1875, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, the church would be still highly influential. You know, you'd have to have the church involved, the priest involved for burial. You know, reach out to that local, again, the local church, the local community, depends on the religion, of course, where those records could be found. That's what I would say.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on parish registers at all, actually. So, what are the things that we need to know? And we kind of make an assumption off the top that there's a heavy influence of the Anglican Church, right? The Church of Canada.
Yeah.
There's certainly a heavy Roman Catholic influence in Canada. What else? What else are the major denominations? Presbyterian.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff. So over the years, the records have been moved around a lot. Of course, churches are closing, congregations are getting smaller. You know, we just recently did a local tour of the Niagara Anglican Diocese that covers a huge section of Ontario, all the way from Bruce and Gray that we were just talking about earlier, down to Niagara. It's a massive, massive area. And all the records are stored in that location. So, and there's a lot of records currently being moved around. So the key note is what the religion is, and then from there, you know, where these records assimilated. Because, well, for the Quakers, for example, there's one particular site, private site, that is probably more influential in information than you could find in any real archives. So it's about just understanding what the religion is and then drilling that down. Again, getting that boots on the ground, especially if you've got to email or mail the local church. I've had to do that in my own research.
Sure. Yeah.
Just to understand. I just mailed the priest of the Roman Catholic Church, and he wrote it down and explained it all to me. And then I was able to proceed. He was good enough to do that. So
right. Yeah. Good. Kind of rare, actually, for to hear a story about a priest having time and the ability to do that. Actually, that's nice to hear. All right. So Ellen asks, and I'm checking the time. Okay, we're good. Is there an area in Ontario where the Irish primarily settled in the 1800s?
Well, Toronto, during the 1800s, anything coming down the St. Lawrence, you're looking Quebec, Montreal, Toronto, Kingston, all that area. And then, you know, the potato famine created a huge immigration into Quebec. And a lot of them settled there. A lot of them migrated down to Toronto. Remember, during that time, it was boat or it was walking. There's very little infrastructure for any sort of transportation. And you can find that there.
It was quite late in the 1800s, early 1900s, correct my history, but before the railroad actually got all
Yeah,
the
it
way
was,
across Canada,
yeah,
right? It
yeah,
was,
yeah.
yeah.
So if you weren't going by some sort of beast of burden, you were hoofing it.
Yeah. All right. And I think we have probably time for just a couple more questions. So Barbara
Okay.
says, my dad and three brothers were in the armed forces in World War II. However, the older men were in the volunteer military at home. Where would I find a list of the volunteer military that sounds like they stayed in Canada?
Wow. World War II volunteer military at home.
Yeah. And just gonna pull it out and say that's probably a great exploration of Google, but also articles from genealogy periodicals. Percy comes to mind.
Yeah.
Military history groups might have something on that. I would also look at newspapers really heavily. I think the key there would be actually identifying which unit. So you could research the unit specifically versus
Yeah.
a name, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the LAC, everything you just touched base on. I had a gentleman, very quick. I had a gentleman come to me once. All he had was an emblem uh,
Mm.
that belonged to his father. And this goes back to the mailing. We have the Royal Canadian Legion over here. I was teaching in a local library. We were 10 minutes down the road from the local Legion. I said,
Mm.
just go down there, buy somebody a beer and show them what you got. And maybe they can give you a hand. And
Yep.
2 years later, he had all the information. So
Wow.
again, it's about that boots on the ground. If you can't find it through the online resources, I'm certain, you reach out to the Canadian, the Royal Canadian Legion,
Right.
and see if they, those people, they lived and
Yeah.
breathed it.
Yeah,
Ask them.
absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite stories, actually, my dad, several years ago, my parents were driving through Nebraska. And we had, ancestors in Nebraska, and they stopped at the town that we knew, closest to where our guy homesteaded. And they stopped and had lunch at this local, sandwich shop or whatever. And they're just sitting at the counter, waiting for their food. And my dad is a natural conversationalist. I
Mm-hmm.
might get it from him, and 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 he just strikes up a conversation with the guy sitting next to them, and the next thing you know, they're getting a personal tour of the town from like the mayor or the historian or something. They were taken out to the homestead to see the actual property. Like they showed a map of the township and range, and the guy goes, "Oh yeah, that's Joe's place or whatever." And they ended up spending most of the day there because there was all these people in the community that were like, "Oh, you want to know about our town? Like, let me show you what I know about the history of this place." And it was fabulous, right? And I got a bunch of stories and I got a bunch of photographs, and it was great. But it's such happenstance, right? It's those
Mm-hmm.
conversations that we really cannot be shy about bringing up that kind of question, especially when we're in the place.
Yes, absolutely. And people here in Canada and Ontario are just so open to just having that conversation. And
Yeah,
I've never gone a place in this province or in this country that somebody's not willing to strike up a
sit down and
conversation.
chat. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kay just posted a question, and I think it's a good one. Is there anywhere reputable online to take Canadian genealogy courses? Funny you should ask, Kay.
Funny you should ask. So there's lots of different. It really, again, it looks for different things. There's a few professional organizations here in Ontario that you can take actual certification courses that you can do. Uh, Recently, with the current events that are going on, a lot of our local branches offer webinars or training. We just finished. Jen was involved. We just finished a 2-day virtual conference at breakneck speed.
Which
Uh,
was excellent.
it was awesome. So a lot of our branches are offering free online webinars that you can go to. Our society does one once a month. That's free to the public as well. Um, I know on our Facebook group, our webinar coordinator actually released all the webinars for the month of June in a little image. So you're more than welcome to join our Facebook group and you can see it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And
I,
you have a webinar. Is it hosted by Ontario? I'm not sure, but Catherine's webinar coming up on researching your ancestors' home is happening, I think, in the next couple days.
yeah, Catherine Lake Hogan,
Yeah.
looking for ancestors. She does her own webinar.
Okay.
And she is probably, I think that's what I've seen on her schedule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it caught my attention because of the show that's happening in the UK, A House Through Time. And so we're at Findmypast, we're talking a lot about house research and house histories internally as well as externally. So I was like, oh, hey, house histories in Canada, that's cool. I even shared it across to the Findmypast team and went, hey, look at that. They're talking about it in Canada too. And everybody went, yeah, okay, Jen, great. Canada. All right. So again, I know there's questions that we didn't quite get to, and I will go back into the comments and reply to those after the fact. We've got about 4 minutes left. So, but there's one question in particular that I wanted to make sure that we got to, Steve, that is maybe just selfish of me actually, because I'm kind of researching this of my own lineage. But can you tell us, I know you're a member of United Empire Loyalists.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about that organization and what it means to you? What is it? How do you do
Okay.
it?
I'll try to give you a 30-second breakdown of that. So that is what we call the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada, or the UELAC. And I was a member of the organization. They're a fantastic group of people. And as you can probably see on my name on your screen, you see the UE after my name. And I can bear those initials because Lord Dorchester from 1793, I think I got the right date, declared that anyone who swore to king and country leaving the American Revolution and coming to Canada were given 200 acres of free land and could bear the initials Unity of Empire, or UE, after their last name. And that included all sons and daughters and descendants thereof. So I have I have a 6th great-grandfather and a 7th great-grandfather who were both original UELs. And they are the only ones that can bear the UEL because they are the actual loyalist. I'm just a descendant of them, so I bear the UE. It is really only a Canadian thing. It comes from, our cousins of the South. My family left during that challenging time and come to Canada. So that's why I bear it. And it's pretty cool. It's an honor to my family and my heritage. And it's a great conversation starter.
I bet.
with people to get them hooked into their own family history. So there you go.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think that takes us to just about the top of the hour, which is great. This has been a really, really good discussion. So thank you again for joining us. I am going to post one more link on the thread. It's actually my favorite records collection from Canada that we actually worked on in partnership with the Ontario Genealogical Society. I'm guessing that you can guess which one this is, Steve.
Well, there's so many of them.
So my favorite, I don't actually have anybody in the collection, but the Oddfellows life insurance applications are phenomenal. If you have not seen these records, take a look at them just out of curiosity's sake. It's obviously a common organization across North America, the Oddfellows. They did offer life insurance, but these are 4-page applications. In most cases, I don't think I've seen one that's shorter than that. No. And on page 2 or 3, I'm trying to remember, there's an actual section where it asks for the family medical history. So it talks about the mom, the dad, sometimes the grandparents, and of course the applicant himself as to his medical history. And that's awesome. Right? Like, how can you not beat something so fascinating? They're part of an organization. They're getting life insurance, and you're getting, crucial genealogical information all at one time. They're really, really cool records. So take a look at those. And that's my last pitch because I just love those records. So let me tell you a little bit about what's happening on the Find My Past Facebook page over the next few days. Tomorrow, Paul Nixon, our military expert, is going to be talking about regimental numbers. That is happening at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, so 4 p.m. British Standard Time. And then, of course, we'll have Fridays live, Find My Past Fridays with Alex on Friday. Next week, believe it or not, I'm actually taking the week off. Not actually the whole week, just from Facebook. So I'm getting a little bit of a break. But Ellie is going to be on Wednesday the 17th talking about Welsh research. Miko is going to be with us on Thursday with a special guest talking about photo dating. And then, of course, we'll do Find My Past Friday on every Friday, right? Every Friday. So look for those. So military regimental numbers tomorrow with Paul, Welsh research and photo dating next week on Facebook with Find My Past. So hopefully all of you can join us for those discussions as well. Take a second to check out the Ontario Ancestors Facebook page and their website. Get familiar with their branches. It's such a fantastic organization. They do so much for the preservation of records and education in Canada. Thank you, Steve, again for your passion and for being with us. We really appreciate it. And of course, this session was recorded on Facebook. So if you want to see something in addition or listen again, just go back onto the Facebook page and take a look. Thank you all for being with us. We appreciate you. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will talk to you all again very soon.
Bye for now.